So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I thank David and his staff for the invitation. I just flew in from COP27, and so I think what I'm going to talk about today is relevant towards climate change and potential climate catastrophe. So I guess my only observation there is not a lot has been done, and we're still way behind in getting towards our goals of 2030 and 2050. I thought today that I'm on a timer, and I have to pay attention to that timer. And I've got 9 minutes and 7 seconds left, so I have to pay attention to it. But we're on a clock with our climate too, and that's 27 years. And so I wish the world could have a clock in front of them every day, so they know that they only have a limited amount of time to get a point across, or to change a technology, or to make grand scale changes that will help us avoid getting to catastrophe. And I know some folks last night talked about 1.5, and I think that's not a reality anymore. We're past that. Now we're looking at maybe 2 or 3 or 4. So hopefully what I talk about today will give you an idea of one way we can handle decarbonizing our planet with simple but a great idea about using existing technology and adding new technology. So, like I said, much has been done to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Renewables have done a great job of taking up the slack of providing renewable energy that's carbon-free. But despite this, fossil fuels are still the dominant energy fuel that makes energy and electricity globally. So, but there's one fossil fuel that actually contributes 40% of our CO2, and that's coal. And I don't know if it would surprise you to know or not, but coal continues to grow on a global scale, the use of coal. And coal-fired plants today provide about 37% of our electricity energy. So it's a big industry. There are 2,400 coal plants across the globe, provide an unbelievable amount of energy. But one great idea would be to close these plants, which we're doing in the United States and Canada. It'd be a great way to reduce our carbon emissions, but the problem is it's not a reality. And closing plants reduces the amount of energy needed to produce electricity, would unjustly reduce employment, and would reduce tax revenue for communities that have coal plants. And so if we want to have just outcomes in the way that we change our technologies, we have to think about the people that are employed in those industries. So TerraPraxis, as he said, we're a small nonprofit out of Boston and London. And we propose to repower the global plant of 2,400 coal plants with emission-free advanced nuclear, such as SMRs or fusion systems, or even geothermal. So 2,400 plants need to be repowered between 2030 and 2050. So that's about one a day, or one a month, for the next 20 years. So you can only accomplish this by simplifying the evaluation, design, and build and operations of existing coal power plants. And we need to do this at real speed and scale. There's been other times in our history we've done things at speed and scale. Unfortunately, it's like in a war, you have to build up your armaments. But there's been other times, in the 1940s when Levittown was built outside of New York. They learned how to build 17,000 houses in 4 years, and they repeated that 4 other times. So you can do things at speed and scale, but it's all about your approach in doing that. So first, I just want to share some bad news. Global carbon emissions continue to rise each year, and most of that is driven by demand for fossil fuels. So despite decades of public and political support and action on climate and large-scale deployment of renewable, at the same time, 13% of the world's population lack access to modern electricity. So, which hurts the health and economic mobility of women and children the most. So millions of people are already exposed to deadly climate impacts and need massive amounts of clean energy to build resilience and prosperity. The bad news is if fossil fuels continue to make up the vast majority of our energy use by the mid-century. All the mainstream projections currently predict that we are on a trajectory to a catastrophic 3 to 4 degrees of warming, which obviously is not a good thing if we've already accepted 1.5. So the good news is we can still achieve net zero by 2050 if innovative climate solutions are pursued at speed and scale. During the pandemic, we learned that treating COVID-19 like an emergency, we're able to collapse vaccine development from 10 years to 10 months. That's an extraordinary process of doing that, and that's speed and scale to react to an emergency. So we should let's start acting like climate is an emergency in the same way, and start reacting in ways to find innovations to make those changes. So we should electrify as much as possible, but to achieve this transition at cost and speed and scale and reduce the risk of falling to decarbonization in time, we need to repurpose as much of our existing infrastructure as possible, including coal plants and their existing transmission, and using the plant as it exists, but making modifications to its fuel source or its heat source. So as I mentioned a moment ago, coal plants are the single largest source of carbon emissions on the planet, but simply shutting them down is not a viable worldwide solution. Coal plants, whether you know it or not, are really economic engines in really small communities in the United States and globally. So shutting them down without having some type of replacement, hundreds of people would lose their jobs, millions on a global scale, and a lot of towns, small towns, depend on the revenue, the tax revenue for their schools and their infrastructure and things of that nature. So simply shutting them down doesn't help anyone. So what we need to do is find a way to keep that coal plant in operation, but change the heat source so we could have carbon-free emissions. And so our vision is to repower coal with advanced heat sources so we can save local jobs, reuse infrastructure, and eliminate 40% of our carbon emissions. And so what we plan on doing is taking the plant and repurposing all the pieces of the plant that are in place. But what we want to do is we've developed a tool called Evaluate, which allows us to evaluate coal plants on a global scale. And so what we want to do is modernize and standardize the design process for coal plants so they can be repurposed at speed and scale. And so we're working with Bryden Wood out of London to help us in the design process so we can design one and make many. So if we can standardize a lot of the processes, then we're in good shape to make this transition. And one of our innovations is thermal energy storage, which delinks the nuclear heat island safety case from the existing coal plant, enables flexible generation, and allows the continued use of the coal plant during this transition. So our goal is to build a fully automated process to evaluate coal plants, from evaluation to define to design to the transactions that are needed to the build and the operate. And so our tool will allow coal plant owners and investors to make wise choices about making this transition from coal to advanced heat sources like nuclear fission and fusion. And so this is kind of a screenshot of our tool, and we have information on every coal plant in the world that we can do analysis on. So it's a really helpful tool. And we're supported by extraordinary leadership. Brad Smith announced at COP27 our Evaluate tool. This is a picture of us at COP27. Just we couldn't ask for greater leadership to sign off on what we're doing, and they've been so helpful in helping us develop the tools. And this is basically what a new plant would look like using modular reactors or fusion reactors. And you're using the existing infrastructure, and that's my story. So I hope you can join us in repowering coal and getting the world back to net zero. So I really appreciate your time, and it's a great honor to be here and talk about TerraPraxis. So thank you very much.